everyone. I am Omkar Patnaik, the founder and president of the Global Federal League. Today we have with us a very special guest, Mr. Barry Stevens, who has worked on a film that's received International Emmy Award bestowed by the International Academy of Television Arts and Sciences in recognition to the best television programs initially produced and aired outside the US. Barry is a Toronto-based documentary filmmaker and screenwriter and has also been an actor. He has worked with the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, where he wrote The Diary of Evelyn Law, which starred Canadian-American actress Sandra Oh alongside other television series. He then switched to non-fiction, writing the Emmy-winning documentary Jerry and Lewis, followed by a documentary on the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission. A personal documentary called Offspring about his search for his sperm donor was seen around the world and was nominated for an Emmy and won many awards. Another focus of his work is war, the human experience and ethics more than military strategy. For 4 years, he directed 31 films based on the memories of veterans of armed conflict in the award-winning series War Story for History TV. Barry was the first filmmaker to get a permission from the first prosecutor of the International Court of Justice, Luis Moreno Ocampo, to film the proceedings for his documentary Prosecute. It followed Moreno Ocampo during the year of the court's first trials and was seen widely. He's now developing several other documentaries, but his main goal is a long-form film about the possibility of a world government called How to Rule the World. So it's a great honor to have you with us, Barry.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So I'll begin with the first question. How did you get into the world of films and how's been your journey until now?
Well, as you said, I was an actor and working in film and television and theater, but you spend a lot of time on the film set just waiting around, and I would read scripts and I thought, I could do that. So I did start to write scripts and became less of an actor. And then I discovered documentaries because you make less money, but they're far more interesting to me. And since the world was changing so fast and is so complicated, the approaches of fiction were generally not clever enough in a way to address what was really happening these days in the world. And so it was the film you referred to, actually. It's called Jerry and Louise. The Jerry is pronounced in the South African way, Jerry. And that was about the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And I loved working on it a great deal. So that was when I made the switch to documentaries, which I've been doing now for over 20 years. Yeah, long time.
So could you please tell us a bit in detail about Jerry and Lewis? I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly right now.
You are, yeah. Well, it's the story of a guy who is a killer, a torturer for the South African apartheid regime. And he actually married a woman, as it was all falling apart, he married a woman who was a journalist and an activist against apartheid. So it was a pretty interesting marriage of two opposites. And we were telling their story, but also telling the story of, story of how Jerry came to be, a killer, a murderer, really, for the police, and how he left that and changed. But also we were telling the story in the backdrop of the very first part of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I don't know if you know about that, but what it was that they set this up at the end of apartheid. Instead of like having revenge, they had a forum where people could tell what happened, what they did, and would not be prosecuted. And they would face their victims often, or their victims would testify, but also so would the perpetrators. And in a sense, it was forgiveness in exchange for the truth. And it was a model. It's been used otherwise elsewhere in different places. And I think has been criticized, as not being justice, but also is always a problem, when you're coming out of a conflict. There's a conflict between peace and justice. And if you pursue prosecutions, if you pursue imprisonment or worse, then the people who are in power, because we're not talking about criminals, we're talking about people who are in power. We're not talking about ordinary criminals. We're talking about very powerful criminals. And if they know they're going to be prosecuted, maybe they won't give up power. So that's the kind of a dilemma that you face. And this was an attempt to resolve that dilemma. And that was very interesting, very interesting story. And I think with some success. I mean, obviously South Africa's got a lot of problems, but it didn't have a civil war.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, the plot is very interesting, and also and this surely deserved an Emmy. So where can we exactly find this? Where can we watch this film?
What a good question. I don't know. I don't think it's on YouTube. It shouldn't be. But I mean, people try to guard their property. They try to put up walls so that you have to pay. But I don't know if there's any place where you can pay to see it. I suppose you could, people of your age and technical ability can usually find ways to download it. Although that would be illegal, and I utterly condemn that. Sorry, it's an interest. I actually don't know. I'm not the director of the film. That was a fellow called Sturla Gunnarsson, and so I'm not sure where you can see it. It's a shame because it was seen widely. It was, I think, on BBC. It was on CNN, and it's a good film. I can say that. I wasn't the director. I was the writer, or one of the writers, who sort of helped shape it.
That's no mean feat. Like writing on a plot that is as unique as this and as insightful. That's a great thing. And I'll surely try to search where exactly we can get this, because I won't mind paying and watching this film.
Well, if worst comes to the worst, I'm sure I can find a DVD. If you know what that is.
Yeah.
Have you heard of DVDs?
Yeah.
Yeah. We can probably find one.
Sure, that would be great. Also, a bit about Offspring, which is a personal documentary, as you stated before. And that was, again, on a very unconventional theme, and that went on to win several awards. So could you tell us a bit about the plot of that?
Yeah, that's a personal film. I was created from a sperm donor. I didn't know that till I was about 18, after my father died. And I guess about 20 years ago, just before the turn of the century, I sort of went on a quest to figure out who this man was. In the course of that, I made a film about it, which is about my search for him and his identity. And we did actually, not during that film, but at a subsequent project, we recorded it and documented it in a subsequent project called Biodad, and we did identify him. And it turned out he had, we don't know, but 600 children. And of course, since, as you can see, I'm not young, a lot of us were born in England from the late 1940s to the mid 1960s. So those people, those hundreds of people, also have children, and some of them have grandchildren. So this is a very large family, very large genetic family, probably the largest in the world, like thousands. And I don't know thousands, but I know of, we've identified, I don't know, probably about 150. But of the actual siblings, maybe about, I think it's 53 brothers and sisters that I know of. And so, yeah, so I, in a couple of documentaries, including Offspring, took a look at this strange world where a man could use his sperm because of infertility of a man, could use his sperm to well, to create children for families that had male factor infertility. And it's an interesting world. It also opens you out into the big world of reproductive technology. I mean, for instance, India your country is a big source of women who would be surrogates, gestational surrogates. So they would bear a child using the egg of another woman who would pay her to carry the child to term. And of course, it's very controversial. And now, of course, you're seeing genetic manipulation of, recently, for instance, a man was given a genetically modified pig's heart. So those same techniques, of course, can be used and are used in the animal and plant world a lot, but are not legally applied to the human world, but probably that will come. So you can actually sort of alter the design of a human being. So all of those things I think were very interesting, but just the fact that there are 600 and 1,000 of us is also by itself quite interesting. So yeah, the film was the first film really to look at this, at least certainly from the point of view of somebody who's involved. So it had a fairly wide impact.
Yeah, again, like this was again on a very unconventional topic, and I would keep on bothering you with the question where to exactly get these films. So
yeah, that I have on Vimeo, and I can make it available. Yeah, it's yeah, I can send it to you or show you where to get it. And if you publish this, you could probably put the link on the if it's on YouTube, you can put the link below.
Sure. I believe our viewers would love to watch the film. And I believe I haven't ever come across a film of this sort. And I personally, being an Indian, didn't know that India is such a big hub of surrogacy and things, because these topics are generally considered a taboo in most societies. And like a lot of people, they don't discuss these things openly. So that's interesting.
I don't know the status of sperm donation whether it's in India, if it's legal. I can't remember.
Yeah, it is legal, and we actually had a film on this that came somewhere around 2012 or 13 called Vicky Donor. I don't know the exact year, but this featured a very prominent actor over here. So that was the last time we talked about sperm donation, and this is legal, but then a lot of people don't talk about it openly, and that's the situation.
Okay. Yeah. In many jurisdictions now, it's becoming open where the child or the offspring has the right to know the identity of their genetic parent. That's resisted, not in my country, but in Britain and Australia and many European countries. They now have open systems where, you know, somebody like me can find out the truth, just like they do for adoptees, people who are adopted. Yeah.
That's great. So is that what prompted you to explore the theme of reproductive technology more?
I think I'm sort of done with it. I've made 3 films on this subject, 3 documentaries, and it's sure I'm fascinated by it. Who knows? But yeah, I think I'm done with that one. More interested in world government now.
Yeah. So again, world government and then reproductive technology and war, all of these are diametrical opposites. So I would come to the next question. How did you get interested in the idea of world government?
You know, I don't actually remember when I first heard about it or thought about it. There was, in the 1980s, there was, as you know, a sort of a new Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States. And it was looking very scary, very scary. There was a real possibility of a global thermonuclear war. And apparently we seem to want to go there again now, have a third Cold War, if you like. And I was working in the peace movement. I was editing one of the editors of a Peace magazine here in Canada, and I was fascinated by it and the stupidity of it. And of course, after the Second World War, as you probably know, there was a lot of talk about a world federation because people didn't want to go through that again. Now, I was born in England, and was quite aware that from a young age that at any given time, 15 minutes later, there could be a nuclear weapon on my head. At the same time, I had family. My father's sister married a German, and my family was English, but they were fighting during the Second World War, before I was born, of course. And I knew them after the war, when I was a little boy in the 50s or 60s, I knew my German relatives. And I thought, this is like absolutely didn't make any sense to me. That I understood why Nazism was bad. I understood that, of course, but fundamentally, people are people, and the idea of absolutely destroying the world because you're mad at another group of people seemed insane to me. It also seemed, very clear to me that within a sovereign state, you have the Hobbesian view is you have, a monopoly of force. Mm-hmm. A monopoly of legitimate force. Outside of that, it's you have a state of law inside, and outside you have a state of nature. It's simply a matter of strength and applying violence to each other. And that seemed to me to be fundamentally absurd. So in fact, and you look at the history of my country, Britain, for instance, and it was a bunch of warring states, and a bunch of very, very violent history. And then it became, a state of ruled by law and fundamentally peaceful. You could, sure, there's conflict, but I mean, it's fundamentally peaceful. And I just thought that should be applied to the world. So bit by bit, I was very interested in that idea, and curious who the people were. I met a long time. There was the president of the World Federalists was an English actor and writer called Sir Peter Ustinov. I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but he was a significant guy back then, more than 25 years ago. And I met him.
Could you please repeat the name?
Peter Ustinov.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the popular components of World Federalism. I've heard his name.
Yeah, and I read various things. Now I've read far more in the last year, but so I was interested in it. But it was just such a sort of a vaguely fringe movement. It still is. But as we've moved forward, I mean, so that's how I became interested in it. If you want to go forward in time, we can talk about that. But how it's changed, and I wanted to make a film about it actually 20 years ago. I couldn't interest anybody in giving me any money to do it whatsoever. However, at the same time, the International Criminal Court was getting started up with the Rome Treaty. And it was being started around 2001 in The Hague in the Netherlands, as you know. And I met the chief prosecutor. I just went there, walked in and introduced myself. And he said, okay, make a film. I said, why? Why me? He said, well, you're the first person who's walked in here with a camera. So, but actually that didn't happen for some years after that. And then it did. And I made that film, Prosecutor, because I thought that, and that you can see, but I think the International Criminal Court was really kind of the first institution since the United Nations, which was transnational, which was not just international. It's called international, but it's really transnational. It's really supranational. and it apply, you know, any war crime or act of genocide or crimes against humanity could be prosecuted, whatever country they're in. There's a whole framework of rules around that, but it allowed that to happen, and has happened, and they prosecuted presidents of countries. So that is I thought it is like a component of a planetary government. You know, a court system, a criminal court, is one of the features of a national entity, of a sovereign entity. Every country has a criminal court. Many of them are corrupt and bad, but they have them. And so to have one for the entire planet, for the worst crimes imaginable, you know, genocide, that was a significant step. So I wanted to document that, and we did. And that was the first time I'd made a film that had anything to do really with the idea.
World government.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you know, people don't like to use that phrase. You know, they don't like to use the idea of a world state. You know, it's terrifying because people, you know, there's a whole anti-government spirit abroad in the world, and people use phrases like world governance or world federalism, which of course is more specific. But a world federalist, a federalist world would be in a sense, would be a government of the world. So I thought that the International Criminal Court is, I don't think it is, the International Criminal Court is a sort of a feature of what that, and it has a kind of a federal structure in that subsidiarity. Countries are obliged to prosecute war crimes themselves within a sovereign state. But if they are unable to or unwilling to, then the International Criminal Court can do it, subject to some other conditions.
Okay, so and the film you were planning to have on the world government, I believe that's how to rule the world. That's something you're working on currently, right?
Yes. I'm not, I haven't filmed, but for a year now, I've been developing it, and I'm going to now take it to the next stage, which is to try to get some funding, and maybe I won't, but in the past we have, so perhaps we can again. It's difficult. It's been difficult during this pandemic to do things, to make films. It's quite difficult. But
best wishes for that.
I think we will. I think we will do it.
I believe surely will, because that's a very important topic, and I believe we will have people out there who are concerned in regards to this topic. So, what does this film exactly deal with?
Well, it will deal with the idea. You know, I want to sort of put the idea on the agenda, and strangely enough, it is coming on the agenda. And that's obviously, I just want to say, like, well, why? Why not? And there are good reasons that people, and I want to look at all of it. You know, there are good reasons why people say, well, it's not necessary. It could be tyrannical. You know, it's absurd. It's ridiculous. How could you ever do that? You know, so there are all these sort of objections, which are, you know, must be given voice. But the central core of it, if you think of the image of the planet. And that image is quite new. I mean, it's, to you, it's ancient history because you're so young, but in 1968, I think, was the year that the first photograph of the whole Earth was published. Actually, they didn't publish it for a while. NASA, the space program in the United States, didn't publish it. They thought it was, I don't know, there's a story about that. It was too difficult, too dangerous. But those images were really pretty significant. And the idea of a whole Earth being a significant unit came in a sense, I mean, was given visual reality by the photographs taken from space. So if you think of that, we now think of the globe as a thing. And I don't think we didn't so much when I was little. And the other other things that have happened, Europe, which is always in crisis and always, oh my God, it's such a failure. Europe is such a disaster. Well, try looking at Europe in 1945, where if you wanted to drive from Warsaw to Paris, you'd need a tank division. You'd need an army. Now you can just basically just get in your car and drive. That's a huge achievement. Nobody, whatever problems Europe has, I don't think anybody really envisions outside of science fiction, France and Germany ever going to war again. And that's an incredible achievement. And it's not, it's sort of halfway between a federation and individual states. It's sort of poised in the middle there. But so that was a development which has happened in my lifetime. But much more recently, the idea of a unified planet, I don't mean unified politically, just the fact that it is together is everywhere in front of us. It's so obvious you almost can't see it. And just 3 or 4 examples that are very obvious. Number one, you and I are talking live. I look out my window and I can't see anything because there's a blizzard. There's a snowstorm happening in my city. I'm pretty sure there's no snowstorm happening in your city.
Yeah.
And you're half the other side of the planet. Now that's 100 years old. People have been on the phone for 100 years, but it's a matter of quantity, the amount of contact, amount of communication that's happening all the time now, all over the world is slowly changing our view of what is the us, what is the community. And in addition to that, more practically or more materialistically, money, capital, moves around the world at the speed of light. Capitalists, traders, stock markets move so rapidly, whether the stock exchange in Japan or in New York, Mumbai, and of course there are movements of people which are much more difficult, which are unprecedented. And then of course there's this pandemic. For all its stupidities and difficulties with which the world has addressed it, it'd be hard to imagine. It's still quite an achievement that 5 billion doses of vaccine have been distributed around the world. And you can imagine if there had been no World Health Organization, it would have been much more chaotic and much worse. It could have been way better.
Yeah.
It could have been a lot better, but it could have been a lot worse. And that's a function of our knowing and understanding the world as a planet. And of course, the final thing not the final, but another aspect of that is so obvious is climate change. There is no way to address climate change on the level of the individual state, individual sovereign state. The atmosphere of the planet doesn't give a flying damn about a national border. It doesn't. So the only way to address it is together. Now, is that happening? Not very well. The problem has always been enforcement, really. The problem has been an obligation that is more than just on one individual's honor, but it's hard to get away from the necessity for the discipline of, Thomas Hobbes's Leviathan. Now that's a scary thought. So the world is sort of poised in this situation where working together with agreements, governance, isn't working that great. So the world government, the world federalist advocates would say, well, we need more. We need a level of government that is planetary and democratic. And of course, the final question is war and peace. So for all of those reasons, I mean, to go into that a little further, peace. How does India, why is India more or less peaceful? I mean, my God, there's a lot of violence in India, but more or less compared to, say, the 18th century or the 19th century, or even like 1947, India is, although of course, the question of Pakistan and India is very painful and very difficult. But within a sovereign state, we've achieved peace in ways that we hadn't before. And it's easy to think of that as being just a given, but it certainly wasn't a given 500 years ago in Britain. It certainly wasn't a given 400 years ago. So is it possible to achieve some kind of level of government above them? Is there a limit to sovereignty? Is there a way to, and because of course, a real war between major powers is suicidal. And we may see it happen. You may see it happen in your lifetime. I may see it happen in my life. So that kind of impels us, I think, to look for some other solutions.